This is episode 12, I believe, of Esports Salon. I'm the usual host, Thorin. This topic is going to be about creating supplementary content, how difficult it is to get that funded, how difficult to get it made. You could always just go the route I've gone, which obviously no esports tournament organizer could do, of just accepting money from people who have gambling sites, essentially licensed to print money, because people who have a license to print money usually don't really care as much about what they get in return for it. But in my case, probably getting more than they could otherwise expect, right? Much like people who might lock out playing gambling might get more than they expect. Could also get less, just as indeed esports pools could get much, much less than they expected if I just go down some sort of dark path in my career, but keep cashing them checks. So sort of an anti-advertisement for my own business there in a way, not even really advertising. So guests for this episode is going to be in the top right-hand corner of the box. I've got Matt Kline, who obviously doesn't have a big name outside of the industry of esports, but that's because he was but a cog in the machine of ESL for many years. And as we all know, sadly, this is just the way it is in big companies around the world, in media companies. It's not really like the days where you know exactly who created what and who produced what. You just know it was an ESL production, and if you like one better than the other, you might never know that it's because person X worked for it or person Y no longer does work for them. So did work for ESL in the past, then moved on to Mashable, so you know, spiraling downhill, but doing his best to enjoy the ride as he goes down that water luge of life, you know. No, obviously he's moved on to the wider world of mainstream media and creating different types of content. Again, not a whole lot of bylines or a lot of sort of fanfare surrounding that. Again, you know, also, sadly, no matter how good his work will be judged by the overall feeling towards his employer. It's not a great scenario to be in, that, is it? Like, you know, you can be doing some great work. Yeah. Hey, listen. Yeah, exactly. So, and the final guest for this one, so it's going to be a 3-man episode, is going to be Tom Newman. Now, normally I only call people by their aliases, but he doesn't use his alias very much anymore. And yeah, that's about it. So he used to previously worked with Cadrid, which was Richard's old stomping ground CS source site. More recently working with SK Gaming. So you might have seen the piece he did when they went to Dallas, when they went to EPL. And then he did a piece that was about like 20 years of SK Gaming. So he's been doing stuff around the SK Gaming organization recently. And I believe most recently, what did you actually do at the Mykonos event?
So Mykonos, I was doing side content. I was working with Parler, essentially fluff that filled what was a numerous amount of voids at the event. So
sure. I mean, I think that's actually like what it says on Parler's CV, isn't it? Essentially fluff that films numerous amount of voids at events. So no, I think you delivered on the expectations there. So well done. Okay, so this topic, the genesis of it was, I only recently, the last couple of years, got into the NFL, and whenever you get into any sports league, you know, you don't have time to just only watch the games. You know, a lot of them aren't available. So one thing that's always fun to do is you look up YouTube videos, you watch interviews, you watch talk shows. And one of the things I was actually shocked by is how outrageously good the NFL films division is, their media arm, which, you know, like I watch the NBA, I watch the NHL. Okay, they'll create little features, you know. If there's a really significant historical thing coming up, like someone goes in the Hall of Fame, yeah, they'll make a little media package, you know, a little highlight package of the guy or cut together a few interview segments. But the NFL one seems above and beyond any other I can even think. I think about the closest you could maybe comes like the UFC, and even then they don't really do as much like historical stuff as the NFL one does. And when I watched it, I was thinking to myself, it is amazing that esports is so far behind in this respect, because they've got so many people in esports with video editing skills. I mean, you just think of all the people from the Frag movie days, for example, who aren't still to this day aren't put to work by the big organizers, you know. A few of them are hired, a lot of them aren't. And I was thinking to myself, when you consider these players are going around the world, they're available for the tournament organizers so often. Some events even have media days now, and yet we get so little what is termed in the media industry supplementary content, you know, stuff that goes along with it, miniature documentaries, so things in the vein of what Tom was doing here, some of the things Matt did at ESL. So I wanted to discuss this, like, as someone, Matt, who worked for ESL, massive tournament organizer, someone who, in terms of the money they bring in, investment, revenue, etc., they should be primed to do a lot of this stuff. And they do little pieces every now and then. But why do you think it is in the esports industry that the kind of the big players at the moment aren't as interested in this kind of content or just haven't invested in it?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is time. When they interview players, they're doing it right before the events start. And I don't know if you've been around players before the events start, but they don't really want to do anything except for what they want to do. So if you don't want to do it, right before the event because it's difficult, which it is, you got to fly around the world to where these guys live, and the teams live in different places. So for a company like ESL based in Germany, maybe it's a little easier. And I know they create a lot of great stuff. In fact, they have some of the best video producers there, or they did when I was there. And they did make a lot of great stuff. But I mean, ESL, like putting together an event, I mean, that's hard enough work. And there's really not like a ton of people who are putting these huge events together, much fewer than I think that you would assume if you're watching it from the outside. And I think the same is true with the video content that goes into it. I mean, they have a small team of maybe 4 or 5 people who are, run around the event all weekend, getting footage and stuff like that. And then after the event, they spend weeks editing it and putting stuff together. So to come up with kind of this supplementary, documentary, more long form storytelling stuff, I mean, that's just really a lot of time and effort and resources that otherwise they're spent on creating the tournaments and creating the broadcast, I think.
I mean, with all that said, though, is this not the sort of thing where, I mean, presumably someone in your position, you push for this sort of stuff, right? Like, can we do a video on this? Can we get something extra created? I mean, I remember, obviously from my own perspective, at a very small level, I've asked a bunch of the tournament organizers I've worked with in the past to do more of those intros for the teams, and to not just make it just like a guy reading out a sentence, but actually do like, proper editing of the footage and try and make it cool, and each one has a theme, etc., which we tried to do, actually, the two of us, when we did ESL 1 Cologne 2016. Right. But, in general, they tend to go with, I mean, as we kind of outlined here, the shortest version, basically. Like, just have a guy read out the text and then someone do a very generic sort of fill behind it with the video. What's the difficulty in kind of persuading these people that it's worth it?
I mean, I think it's a matter of, like, the cost benefit. Like, so, for them to they could go really hard in the paint and create something just amazing. I mean, they absolutely have the resources to do that. But I think that in terms of, like, what does it benefit them as a tournament organizer, as a broadcaster, to include a piece that, originally is probably going to air in the event like Valve does, right? And then it'll live on YouTube, and maybe you're going to make some advertisers happy, with a couple sponsors happy with that, right? But I think in general, that's not what the sponsors want to spend money on. That's not where the revenue's coming in, right? I know you had the discussion with Travis and Joe and company about monetizing the content, right? And to just do something like that and put it in the stream, I mean, right there, you're not monetizing it almost at all, unless you're, making sponsors happy, and then to put it on YouTube afterwards. I mean, it's never really going to be worth the cost to do something like that unless you have kind of a direct sponsorship, I think, on top of that.
Can I rebut in?
Yeah, come on.
So I just want to say, I think you're very much undervaluing the monetary value of building a story prior to an event, this lead up to an event. So one thing I've sort of cherish is UFC's model at the moment, like you said earlier, Duncan, is the fact that they have, I mean, if you wanted to mimic two scenes, they have very much the same format, as in they're probably an event a month, correct me if I'm wrong, or very few months, which is exactly the same as UFC. Difference between ESL and UFC is UFC's content creation does not end. Once an event ends, that is now then story building into the next event, whether it be transitioning from the results of the event that just happened and then building how does that now affect the event that's going to happen in the following month. And they create a story arc through a bunch of different formats, and that must that must affect the viewership figures of the event that's going to come. And I mean, so that does affect how much the sponsors care about things on the day. And maybe they aren't shown on through the actual broadcast of the event itself, but I think they 100% affect the viewing figures of the event that the tournament, that the advertisers and the sponsors care about. So I think they're not shown on during the weekend, but 100% I think they definitely play a big part, if not the biggest part, in generating viewership to the event that these guys put money into.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, as a storyteller, I mean, that's, to me, that's like the most important part, right? Like the tournaments and the results and the matchups are like the exciting part, but like the story, how we get there and what happens afterwards is definitely for me the interesting part. I think the part that is different between the UFC and say a company like ESL is really just the number of people that are working on it. And I know just like a couple of years ago, ESL was doing, right now they're focusing on just a few main games, events. But when I started, they were doing all sorts of stuff across the board. So it was literally a case of, we have a small team and we need to do a World of Tanks event, followed 2 weeks later by maybe a Counter-Strike event, and then a Dota event and stuff. And so you have guys who are constantly working. Even if you're just a CS player or you're a CS fan, you don't realize that the guys who are producing the CS content are producing all the other content that ESL needs to put out for white label productions, for their own stuff. So it's really a grind. And I think that there's a bit of a balance that comes in there. I think now they're starting to have more resources and time to kind of make those storylines, but it's something that's like kind of evolving and happening pretty quickly, I think.
Okay. So Tom, since you worked with SK Gaming, and that's another kind of person you'd expect to want this sort of content, especially like if you're a very storied team, you want to build up kind of the legends of your team and you want to explain why your team's got to the top now. You don't want it to just be the results alone, because that's obviously great marketing, right? What's the difficulty like in getting teams to do this sort of content? Because I notice they'll do like every now and then they'll do a little piece, but a lot of them also seem bizarrely somewhat a bit resistant to it.
Yeah, they're kind of resistant, but I think they're not as quite as like organised as I'd imagine if I went into like Chelsea Football Club and tried to get them to do it, where they've actually got, actual contractual blockades. I think it's more, from my experience going with the SK guys, it was more trying to generate just a relationship with the players. And once they realised that, I was a guy they could get along with, then it was okay. And they'd give me some of their time. But I still, my sort of still worry is that I don't think it should be the organizers, the team owners that should be creating this great content. I don't think it's kind of their role. And I think it should heavily rely on the TOs to be having the resources to be able to produce these stories for the teams. And yeah, that's one thing I realized with SK. It's like I felt that I was making content that should kind of be for ESL or should kind of be for ECS. I felt I was making it for like I guess if you want to do historical pieces, that's fine. SK can put out their own budget for stuff like that, but stuff like events and how the current team's performing, it was a weird sort of disconnection between myself and ESL, and it was kind of trying to get permissions between both filming at their event, but I'm actually doing a documentary for the team and it's paid by the team, but it's all the content I'm capturing is of their event. And it was just it felt very unnatural, and I think that's something that's going to probably change in the next few years, because it should be the organizers, I think, that are actually making these films. Yeah, for sure.
Because like an obvious issue I can see between the two perspectives we've outlined here is that, like, on the one hand, big tournament organizers, if they were going to do this sort of thing, would think to themselves, I'll just tell another one of my staff to do this, like, do this project over here. They wouldn't necessarily assign an entire team or hire outside people. But if they don't currently have a whole division, as in if the kind of proof of concept hasn't happened for them where they've decided they're going to go all in on it, then hiring outside people probably also should be considered. But it seems like in general, tournament organizers don't really tend to do that. Like, I've seen it happen rarely. Like, I believe for the MLG Columbus major that they hire, I think MLG themselves somehow were involved with hiring the one-up guys, those people who do the Team Liquid content. But in general, I noticed that doesn't happen a lot either. They either just don't do this sort of content, or if they do, you can tell they just tell one person, usually whoever the generic video editor guy is, right, there's another job for you. And I'm sure you probably doesn't appreciate that. So what's Tom, in theory, you go around and you're available as like a one-man production crew for this sort of thing, or you bring on extra people. Is it tough to get an in to work with these companies?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's a balance. I don't know if it's a monetary issue, or I don't know if it's a weirdly arrogant issue. And that's genuinely my view. I don't know if ESL think, oh yeah, but we can make this. Like, for example, and I'm not trying to tarnish ESL's rep at all. So I worked for a completely external sports company that are also owned by MTG, and they do the Rugby World Cup.
Okay.
And they hired me on an esports project to pitch not so much a pitch, but to show ESL how we could condense their an event into a 22-minute TV show format. And I and actually my housemate that I live with, who has nothing to do with esports, hasn't got a clue. We produced a 22-minute show that did the last IM Oakland, not the one that just passed, the one before that.
Sure.
And we built a 22-minute package that maybe ESL could sell to broadcast television. And for whatever reason, by the sounds of it, they didn't have budgetary issues. They didn't go with it. And then I went and got the job with the SK guys, and I went to Dallas. And I shit you not, 80% of the content I created was sort of slightly repackaged and was now within their ESL broadcast for the Pro League.
Sure.
The stuff that we made. And I was like, cool, that happens in the industry, whatever. They see something and they go, we can do this ourselves in-house. And that's where I get this kind of feeling that maybe it's an arrogance thing and maybe they think, oh, we've got a really good team, we can do it ourselves. Yeah. But I think it might be an admittance from their part where they need to understand that if you haven't got the resources to do everything, it might be beneficial for you and the community at large to just pump some funds into some guys that can actually make stuff that is needed. Like you said, like these historical sort of NFL style pieces, or like building, rivalries and stories and stuff like that. And I think ESL for sure. I've not really worked with DreamHack before, so I'm not sure what their standards and things, and I've not worked with E-League either. But I think ESL for sure have a stance where they go, nah, we're not going to hire freelancers for stuff that our own guys can do.
I mean, I know on the E-League tip, the funny thing is that's another one you'd expect to be interested in doing it, Basically, they are a tournament organizer, but they're also the broadcaster themselves, so you'd think they'd have even more reason as TV to wanting to build up the storylines. And they did do little pieces, they do like a short interview or a very short concept piece. So, for example, we did one in season 2 about like Astralis, they always choked in all these big scenarios. Would they get over it? Like a short little piece like that. The downside is, I can tell you that it's not that dissimilar from what I described with the ESL scenario, where it's not that they had like a whole division separate for this. They just basically got the people who were the producers anyway and people who put together the video packages. And I actually felt a bit guilty in this sense, because when you're in the production meeting, they're asking for your ideas along these lines. You eventually learn just making extra work for that guy who just would have had a day off, or you'd be doing something else. Yeah. And so he's going like, oh, cheers, yeah, brilliant idea, and you're going, yeah, what about this one? You could also go with like player rivalry, and you can tell those guys are hating life, So that is actually part of the problem. How do you think we make the transition then, Matt? How do we get from the point where we are now to where one day this exists? Because, I mean, it does exist to some degree in every other sport, as far as I can tell. So what do you think has to happen before then?
I mean, I think one of the main things is that the companies need to be aligned within themselves. So I know, for example, like at ESL, there is a video team, and they do work solely on creating video content. But when I was producing an event, I would go to them and say, hey, I want to create all this content, and they would say, well, this is what we have planned to create already. So, we'd have to figure out some sort of compromise, because they have a certain way that they want to do things that has worked, and I want to do new things. And you can't just come in and try to redirect all the resources towards one specific thing, right? So and also they have sponsor obligations, right? So, they need to make something for Intel. They need to get certain interviews and things like that. And those are always going to come first to any sort of editorial storytelling stuff. I think that the ultimate way to really ramp it up is they just need the influx of sponsor money, and then they're going to be able to create content that they can get eyeballs on, and then that's a snowball effect in a positive direction, where you can continue to build out your team, continue to build great content, continue to make the sponsors happy, and get people to view these things at your tournaments, during the event, or as a standalone piece that people will really enjoy, and then you can tell that story of your event before and afterwards, and then when people are watching a tournament, they have this kind of understanding that it's not just they're playing games again, but this is what's on the line type thing. To Tom's point, I think that anytime you have a brand, so for example, if you're a team, if you're SK, if you're Astralis, it's important that you do build your own content, because it needs to be organic. It needs to come from the ideas that you have as a team, as a brand. So I think it is important to tell that story. I don't think it should lie on the tournament organizer to do anything other than tell the story of their tournaments and their competitions.
Okay.
But you are getting now en masse agree with what you say, 100%. Teams make their own stuff, especially if they've got sort of SK, Fnatic, vast histories, 100%. But you're getting event films done by the teams on events.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously like some crossover, right? Because they're at the event, and so you're advertising the event, you're advertising the team. Anytime you're filming these kind of things overlapping with each other, it serves both purposes. But that's why I think both people should, or both parties should be involved with it. I think that it should be sort of a give and take. I mean, like I mentioned, in the past, like in 2014, 2015, it was just impossible to get the teams to go along with anything. If you had a good idea, like, you'd get to the event and you'd say, hey, we need this team here, and they'd say sure, and then they wouldn't be there. Now it's getting a lot better these days because the teams are way more professional, right? But I mean, I think that's still, like I said, it's like something that just needs to be ironed out, and I think that we're heading in that direction. But it's just going to be like a time and cooperation thing.
I think another angle actually is the fact that if you look at, I know it's an awful way of judging who's good and who's bad and doing film work in our industry, but if you look at, for example, the guys that were voted up for those esports awards, I don't think it's a single one of them in terms of the filmmaking that were not part of a team as opposed to a tournament organizer.
Right.
Yeah, I think in some sense they were all connected with a team.
Yeah, they're all team-based freelancers, and I think there is a weird, I mean, I don't know how to explain it myself, but I think there's a thing where all of the good filmmakers and all the guys with actually sort of, creative flair are actually assigned to these, Team Liquid have got one up, and, well, whatever, I've been doing stuff for SK,
Hitch guy for
Optic and stuff like that. And I think I don't know if that's because of the monetary offerings that TO's putting out, or if it's a case of, I don't know, maybe the hiring process is shit. Who knows?
I mean, if I had to speculate, like, I would just say that I'm definitely, Matt, you might know more on the TO side of things, but from the team side of things, as far as I know, if I had to guess knowing the people who run the teams, I would just, like, basically, I always say this about esports organizations, they're really just agencies. And the best thing that people like Jack and Steve Arnett from Team Liquid, they're just the best agents. What they do is go out and get some wicked sponsor deal for this part of their company, and then they get another sponsor deal for this other part of their company. And up to this point in time, that's about all they've done. That's where they make their money. They don't anymore make the prize money or any other. They don't make much merchandise and revenue off the fans. So the thing is, I can understand why those guys have been kind of the first ones to scout this area, because they can go and land a sponsor where they tell this sponsor, right, you're going to sponsor the reality show, and that's going to be, there's going to be one episode every week that'll follow us through whatever LCS or in the build up to. I mean, funnily enough, it doesn't always work out. Like, for example, I noticed Immortal's timing on having that one about like the boot camp of like, will our CS:GO team get it together? Was like, oh, that's I feel bad for whoever edited that, because I'm sure they went in thinking it was a wicked story, but obviously it was dead already. But you can see what I mean. Like, I can see why they'd be early on the ground in that respect. What would you say, Matt? Where were you going to come at this from?
I mean, I think that just as a team, right? Like, you need to create the stories for your players in particular, and you need to create that personality. And I think the video content's like just a great way to do it. I mean, obviously there's a lot of other ways. There's players on teams that are just outspoken and they have a lot of fans and stuff like that. But really, to tell those stories, I mean, I think it comes down, like you said, to the agents of those teams, to the Steve Arhants, to the everybody who is able to bring in the resources, bring in the one-ups, and really like create the story and create this environment of, this is Team Liquid, or this is Virtus Pro, and this is why they're organic and different from the other teams, which is interesting. Like, because I see the Overwatch League, right? They're really heavily invested in, I think, creating this video content, and they put out a few pieces already. But it's interesting what they're doing is because they're sort of starting all these new brands, all these new teams,
sure,
and so they're kind of, I mean, it's sort of like they have a garden and they're going to like water all the plants and watch them grow by creating video content for them. And that was kind of what you were talking about, is like, maybe the TOs should do that. I think in the case of the TOs doing it, though, you sort of get, I mean, I feel like what's going to happen with the Overwatch League is you're going to maybe get a feel for the players, but in terms of the videos themselves, they're going to be, all created by the same team, by the same guy. So the teams themselves are sort of going to be having the same feel, I think. Which is why I think that it's better when, if you have an independent organization like like any of the teams out there, that you sort of set the tone for yourself.
Sure. I mean, also, I guess it's worth pointing out as well, like, actually the Overwatch League brings up a pretty good point in this context. Like, if we're talking about the UFC or the NFL, those are, I mean, in the case of the NFL, it's the same as the Overwatch League. It's a franchised league where by being part of the league, like, the teams themselves answer to the league, and therefore, it's a lot easier to get this access and to get the players because they are sort of the players of the NFL. And the UFC, I mean, to a lesser degree, but you are signed with the UFC. Actually, funnily enough, the UFC fighters might be the best combat sports in general are understanding the link between promotion and their own success, because they understand it's not about how amazing I am when I knock the guy out if no one's watching and I'm a really bad ticket draw. They know when they go in the negotiation that means something, and then as a result they seem to be by far the best I've ever seen in sports at giving up time to media people. I mean, obviously some of them will even do interviews after being knocked out like an hour earlier, which is ridiculous when you think of some of the teams. I mean, I can't remember which event it was recently. There was an event recently, I can't remember which one it was, where actually, it was the League of Legends World Championship. So this event where everyone builds up for the whole year, and some of the teams just would not do interviews after being eliminated. It was outrageous. Like I get it in a way, like, oh, maybe come back tomorrow, but someone would just like, no interviews, like that's part of why you're there, that's a big deal. So this is actually a topic we can maybe talk about, because surely a problem in the past, as you outlined before, Matt, and you definitely know this, Tom, is that it's actually getting the players to do it as well. Even if the owner of the team signs off and says, yeah, I'll give you access to them, that doesn't necessarily mean you just start rolling the camera, right? You've got to get these guys to actually turn up and to give you to work with you, to talk to you, etc. So what are the challenges there?
Yeah, I don't know who tweeted recently about saying, one of the big things about being tier one is actually having to be able to,
No, that was
play.
me, actually.
Was it you?
Yeah, well, my point was, if people want to complain about, oh, this, that, the other, well, when you're getting these massive salaries and you're getting all this other stuff, because the reason I said it in CSGO especially is because in the other games, they get it a bit more. Like in League of Legends, people know, right? I also have to stream as well to, to give the sponsorship hours to my owner. Whereas CS was the worst example, because that was the one where, for people who don't know, part of the reason why TSM no longer have the team that's Astralis is that they signed this team and naively thought to themselves, right, we'll have one of the best teams, but they'll also stream, they'll come to a team house, they'll create all this content. And what they very quickly found out was you could have never succeeded, because as the team did really well and won all the tournaments, they'd tell TSM, oh, we're too busy actually, we can't do any of the streaming and stuff, so which do you want us to do? Like, stop practicing, or do you want us to do the content? And he'd be like, well, it's both, obviously, isn't it? Like, that's why I'm paying you the salary. And they'd be like, nah, but if you want us to be number one though, we've got to kind of practice all the time. So if they, that's why I was saying, you can't then after the fact be like, I'm not going to do this signing session I agreed to do, like, fuck this, actually, I'm out of the tournament, so see ya. So, you actually are being paid for more than just being brilliant at the game in that context, right?
I think you're right, because I was actually quite gifted with SK, and I've not really worked with many teams, but I was very sort of blessed in the fact that they were, regardless of loss or win, I'd be there with them outside, and they'd be saying, fuck, bad performance, or great, we're off to the playoffs, or something like that every time. But I see I was speaking to just the other film producers of the other teams, especially like Cloud9, stuff like that, a lot of struggles from the producers to get anything on a loss. And I think they've got to realize that this is still opportunity for content. The stories change, and whether you win an event or lose an event doesn't mean it can't all be wins. Actually, some of the best stories are from the greats not winning.
Sure, yeah.
They are from this, and I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of the players need to realize that. I mean, come on now you're earning the big bucks. Let's not fuck about. I mean, you gotta just suck up the loss and actually sit in front of the camera for an hour afterwards and say stuff. I mean, I was blessed with SK that was still. I mean, after the major, I actually did all of my feature interviews of every player post major. So after the 6-7 weeks I was with them, and it was an hour, it was, the full Joe Rogan with each of them. And I don't think many teams would have done that. I think they would have got the fly home. And I think you're absolutely right in that sense. I think they've got to realize that they are, as well as having to have a specific, focus on their craft, which is playing and winning and competing in this game, they also need to realize the media engine that's behind them, and whether or not they win or lose, they still have to partake.
And that's one of the things I think that's kind of been sprung on them, because I think when they started, I mean, the whole media coverage thing, it wasn't a big deal. Like their job was to go play in tournaments and try to make money, right? And so now you have everything like breaking out, and everybody wants this and that, and they probably feel like they don't really need to do that, because they're going out and they're playing in the tournaments and they're doing fine. And when they make the content, or when they take the time to do the interviews, they're just it's benefit to other people, or even just or their team, right? But I can understand why that's a difficulty, but like Tom said, they definitely need to just understand that that's the job now. I mean, the job is that you are an entertainer, and playing the game is only part of it. You have to be available for interviews. You have to be available to, at the very least, talk to the videographers, the producers from your own team. Because if you're not giving access to the guys from your own team, I mean, it's difficult enough to, from a TO or from an outside outlet to try to get these interviews. But you're expected when you're on a team, I think, to perform duties other than playing and practicing, and that's something that is very recent, maybe for a lot of these guys, but very important, because that's where the money comes from.
One question I've got for probably both of you is, what's your view on how a lot of players now have their own video subsidiary? Sure. For example, Fallen's got Fallen Insider, or Shroud back in the day had his own YouTube channel that probably had or 500,000 subscribers. I don't know how that matches up to the actual entire Cloud9 channel. Or there are some people now that the issue I had was juggling the thought of, am I sending out my content even on the right platform? Like in terms of who's going to see it? Because some of these players now, where they've got their own brands and stuff, are now actually, you got TO, then you got teams, and now you've got players with their own sort of video production units. And that was something that I was just not even prepared to battle. So I was wondering, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, and I think that's a symptom of, like, Thorin, when you were mentioning, the NFL does great stuff, and we were talking about the UFC and stuff. And I think the difference there is that you can name UFC, and that's MMA, right? And you can say NFL, that's, American football. Sure. But who's the tournament organizer that is in charge of esports? And the answer is there is none. So ultimately, like, nobody really is going to feel any obligation to any of the tournament organizers. And I think the same is kind of true with the teams. I mean, when you look at teams in the NFL, they have players under contract for long-term, in a lot of cases, longer-term contracts, right? And that happens in esports, but I think that, we see players moving around a lot, right? So maybe they feel a certain affinity towards a team, but they might also realize that when they're helping that team to create content, they're not necessarily helping themselves, they're helping the team. And they might be on a different team next week, they might be in a different team in a year. So they need to look to themselves as, like, I'm the source, right? And these guys are, like you said, my agents. So I think that might be why, some have opted to sort of go on their own, even if they're a part of a bigger organization.
Isn't that just a contractual weakness, though? Is that just...
Yeah, it is, obviously. Like, the big problem here in a lot of these scenarios is, like, absolutely all the team owners could just tell these people, like, fucking do it or you're fired tomorrow. It's just that obviously they don't want to, they want to play nice, don't they? So they kind of, it's like they have a bunch of kids that they spoil and they let the kid off with it and go, yeah, all right, and you don't have to do your homework, like, unfortunately, at the moment they're doing decently well enough, or just it hasn't become a pressure point yet that they haven't forced them to. I think an issue in this sense, actually, as well, is just the age of the players, obviously, and the fact that they essentially, it's bizarre as it sounds for somebody who's a 20-year-old professional making $20,000 a month, actually still doesn't really understand what the expectations of his job are. Like, he doesn't understand, for example, if he loses. Here's the part I've never understood that they couldn't get through to players. If you lose the tournament and you were a massive favorite and you fucked it all up, do some amazing interviews, because at least that way you can tell the team owner, you know what, I still did some media here, and look, this one got to high on Reddit or whatever, and I was able to shout out the sponsors, whatever it might be, I even played a part in, crafting the narrative so that people didn't just go in on us too hard. I could make the point that, we had difficulties before with practice, or this player was ill, whatever. Like, that's actually a really cool way to kind of, like, you can't really recoup the loss of the tournament, but you can at least kind of make something out of it, right? You've taken you've done the old, like, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade scenario. I could have gone with the other version of that one there, but I kept it kosher. Kept it 100% kosher. So, no, it's amazing that they don't get it, though, isn't it? Like, that's one of the things I've always thought is bizarre. You would benefit from it if you did it the right way.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely just very interested in the game, I think. I mean, I think it shows that they're, 100% focused on the game, which is cool. But yeah, I mean, they got to just man up and do it. I mean, I was trying to interview a guy, I won't say who it is, but he's a kind of well-known CS player, but he's not pro. And he's a young guy, and I was saying, hey, he was in kind of a bad situation, and I thought it was an interesting story I want to talk to him about. He's like, I don't do interviews, and I was like, man, if you do this interview, it's probably going to help you out.
Who the fuck are you, Prince? What's this? I don't do interviews. He's not even a famous guy. Yeah,
I mean, like you guys probably know him, but and he's like, no, and he's a young guy, so I could just he's I guess a little immature, but I was like, if you want to become pro, the best way to do it is put your face out there and put your name out there and tell your story. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that that's a big part of it. That's a big part of Tom Brady's appeal to people. Is not that just he's the greatest, but that he's got this whole personality, and people either love him or hate him. And that's what makes him a player. It supplements him on the field.
That's actually a couple of things. Oh, did you have something, Tom?
No, I was going to say, just reflect with Tom Brady. I mean, you think Conor McGregor, he just came out and winged half the lines he said at every sort of weigh-in?
Oh, for sure.
No, for sure. He sat there, he thought about these things. I mean, he got a pinstripe suit that had "fuck you" wrote up every seam.
A lot of people don't get that, though, Tom. That's actually what's amazing. Is that, for example, when Chael Sonnen did all that stuff, a lot of people thought he was really just speaking off the cuff. He'd so obviously, it was like a wrestling promo, he'd sat down and worked on his best lines, hadn't he, and sort of figured out, if this guy says this, I'm going to go with it. Like, it was all scripted, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's unreal that people think that. I mean, and it shows, because a lot of the teams are quite bad at self-promotion. Yes. And yeah, that is another issue, and that's why actually not only is it making video content, it's actually the teams understanding that you need to come and sit, when you're sitting in the chair, you need to come out with some good shit. And actually, I've done a lot of video content actually in the past few months for BAMA, which is a subsidiary of the UFC, they're lower league, and I've been doing a lot of interviews for their fights, and you sit them down in the chair, and they're like, before the cameras are rolling, they're clapping, they're like, I've got some good stuff to say.
Okay.
They understand the fight promo game, and it's been established, obviously with boxing being having such a long legacy. Sure. They understand the fight promo game, and maybe that's just not established in esports at all at the moment, because they don't realize that this is actually you're not doing it for me, you're doing it for you.
Yes.
And,
well, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, a couple of aspects on that. One is that as I referenced, if you lose the tournament, a part that a lot of the players still haven't understood is that they can play a role in how they craft the way their image is. Like, if you don't do interviews, for example, I can think of some classic examples in Counter-Strike where, from the outside, we've heard stories like, the envious team when Kenny S and them were in, they never used to practice. If you don't want people saying that, do a fucking interview where you actually make the point of what your real problems were. And even if it is that you don't practice, you can find a way to spin it, can't you? You can be like, we found that, we argued too much. We were trying to keep the team together. Whatever it is, you can play a role in crafting how your image is. So again, you're not doing it for me in that scenario. You can help yourself. And then the other aspect that, unfortunately, it's just a thing of people being young, so I get it, is that the ones who are 21 don't actually realize that one day they might want to look back and be like, I hope everyone remembers what a wicked player I was, and that they won't go, not everyone's not going to go, think about this, okay? Everybody in the world who knows about football knows who Pele is, right? But except maybe watching a documentary, I bet 99% of people alive today who follow football have never seen Pele play one match ever. So if you're like Kirby or someone, obviously it's the most ridiculous example. I've had to pick someone who's young, maybe could be very good one day, right? No one's going to go back and watch your best game and go, what a wicked player. But they might remember some sick documentary you did, or the way your image was and the way people talk about you, and people remembering the big things you did. So you've got to take a part in that, I mean, people can't just create all that externally. You've got to do the interviews and do the documentaries and hopefully be part of the process, because even if someone could do it all externally, they probably won't know all the details or all the cool stories, or as you're saying here, what your opinions were. If you really had a rival and you thought the guy was shit and you were really good and he was overrated, you probably should find a way to explain that.
That's something I actually still relish to this day, is the fact that I'm so angry with the fact that everyone thinks everybody should be really happy, friendly, go lucky with everybody else, all the other teams. I like the fact that Virtus Pro still say shit. I think Immortals or the ex-Immortals or the Mixing, I think they're fantastic for the scene.
By the way, if this was the UFC, they would take that whole shitfest and that would become like the fucking biggest show in town. It'd be like the bad guys are here, no one wants them to win, It'd be sick, wouldn't it?
They're like the Nate Diaz of fucking, Counter-Strike at the moment.
And it's like that was MLG back in the day with Idra, with when he would, go on stage and just talk mad shit. Like he didn't care what anybody thought because he was just like, fuck you guys, I'm the best, right? And he'd do crazy shit, and that's what people remember him for, and that's why he's like a known player,
And that's another thing. It's like there's now a expectation within the scene, this sort of like PC ethos in the Reddit community that everybody's going to be just, nice to each other. And I fucking hate when I see tweets from like one top team to another top team prior to like a semi-finals of a major event. Oh, good luck, guys. Like, well, yeah, man, you just like, what the fuck are you talking about? It should be the complete opposite.
Yes.
And you can do that to yourselves backdoor, behind the stage. I'm sure they don't actually hate each other, and I'm sure Conor McGregor, after he finishes a fight backstage, says congratulations dude, we did a great promo, blah blah. I'm sure that happens, you see, but for the general public, you need to have these sort of rivalries, and I mean it's quite mute, and I think that's might be the biggest reason why CS may be stagnating at the moment, is because what are the real rivalries now, really?
They don't do a good job of portraying them. That's the problem, isn't it? Like they happen, but then that's what's funny is when people say, it's a famous line people try to claim, the reason why the rivalries aren't good is because they meet too often. I think it's that they meet too often with no context. Like, what if you actually were a guy doing a documentary, let's say you were going to film for 6 months, it's even better for you that these teams would meet in like 4 semi-finals. That's a fucking dream. There's your plot points, that you build in between, and then you're trying to figure out how to get between those points. If you only had once, that's one of the problems sometimes that the UFC runs into. You can set up all the story, but if these guys never fought before, it might just be a shit fight. You don't even know it's going to be good, and it's tough to really know where they're going to meet up and what the differences are going to be. It's better if you've met a lot of times and you have the rivalry then, it's really established. You're just telling the next chapter of it, updating it, and maybe like adding a little bit of spice to whatever's coming next. Because I feel like, to tie it back into what we were talking about before, even though it doesn't have to be an ESL, these people who have a circuit, okay, if you're someone like E-League, right, admittedly, you do one season every, say, 6 months. You don't know if you're doing another one, It's tougher to plan. If you are ESL or your DreamHack, these people have got a full circuit lined out for the whole year. I also think, if you can get the players on board, this is where, when ESL Pro League finishes and your next event is, whatever it might be, one in 2 months or a month from now, it's after the event that you need a media day where you interview some of those players for the build up to the next one, of like who won and what the rivalries are and what's going to be different next time. You get all the quotes, because then you've got the footage long in advance. You're not doing it, because that's the problem, isn't it? You can't really just do the media day before the event. Like, that's going to be a nightmare for whoever edits that, and you won't have time to get it out in appropriate time. The UFC releases those like countdowns like a week before or 2 weeks before. Sometimes they have multiple episodes if it's a massive one. But I feel like that would be very well suited if you could create those, because if you could build in the storylines of what's going to happen and what the big rivalries are, I think people would get hyped. Because obviously one of the reasons the UFC does that is to like ingrain in your brain the date when the fight is, and then also to give you an extra reason to want to watch it rather than just the fight. You want to know that, like, actually, Daniel Cormier doesn't think John Jones was the real champion, and he thinks this, it adds an extra element. It really, obviously it does. Everyone knows who watches the sport. It gets you hyped, right?
And the other thing is that it doesn't even matter like what happens, in the match, because if it's a stop or if it's close, like either way, that's the end of the story, and the story ends like, climactically. It doesn't matter. Like if you have two rivals and you build it up for months and they go in there and it's just the shittiest match of all time, that's everybody's going to talk about it forever. Like, oh, they hyped it up and it was just like, they didn't come prepared at all. And if it's the closest match, if it's comes down to the wire, like that's crazy too, right? But in reality, I mean, to build that hype, to build that, I guess the like the weight, of the result, or the weight of the way that the match goes, you have to have that story behind it. But I think, to your point, you said, the UFC does it. I think it's because the UFC has these guys, they're part of the UFC. Players aren't part of ESL. Players aren't part of E-League. Players aren't part of DreamHack. The only thing that players might be part of, as a group, could be like a players organization, which then could maybe make some deals with these organizers, right? And that's maybe the next step to take. But I mean, as of right now, what's the impetus for a player or for an organization to just, lend their players out, especially, as we talked about earlier, the players just want to practice. They don't want to be pimped out by their teams. So, it's just not going to happen.
I mean, they say that. They say they don't want to be pimped out. They'll definitely accept that higher contract with the extra wages and then go, yeah, of course I'll do all these things in the small thing. Fuck, I didn't agree to do that interview. Yeah, that's half the problem I think we've encountered so far.
I think you are right, though. I think you are right, though, in this sense. I think it actually probably the core issue is, for sure, oversaturation in the market. And, anyone who fights in the UFC fights in the UFC, and that's it. And I think you are very much struggling to build any sort of real depth to your sport if there are 4 to 5 others also trying to do the same thing. And they're not going to create the same content. They're going to do it differently. And I think,
or they do create the same, or they create exactly, or it's all like kind of the same but different, and like, because maybe you'll watch one event and they do something cool, and the next event it's a different organizer and they want to emulate it, and they got they got kind of the same thing going on. You're getting the same answers from the teams because they're talking to different people, so they're going to say the same thing because there's no point to progress it. But like, if it were the UFC, then you could really, start at A and end at B. But, instead we kind of just do the same thing over and over again, I think. And it's difficult to tell a story, especially like, let's say you're ESL 1 Cologne, right? Or you're doing the event ESL 1 Cologne and you want to tell the story about what's going on there. I mean, what do? Do you only talk about the previous ESL Pro League season? Do you talk about ECS? Do you talk about E-League?
I think you're actually getting into a pretty good point here, actually, which is that has always from day one been the biggest problem, is that everyone wants to pretend that they're the big league, and they
right.
think that to do so you have to pretend the other league doesn't exist. And so obviously this used to affect like seeding or invites, because they'd base it on their last tournament, not, let's say, a tournament just won the rivals tournament, because you don't want to give some sort of credence to that tournament organizer. But I agree, the problem here is, maybe to an ESL, they're put off doing a storyline video about this team that's on a super hot streak because the tournaments they just won was ECS and DreamHack, and they don't want to be like, wow, the champion of these tournaments is going ours, They want to be like, oh yeah, those don't really exist. The last IM Oakland a year ago, which
right.
doesn't really work as well, does it? Unless it's only
exactly.
about that tournament,
I think ESL for sure are probably the most privy of doing that. 100%. They're very proud, and then, what they should be, because I think what are they? They're the longest standing one, right? They are the originals, so that's sure. But I mean, you're so right, Matt, in the sense that I remember at 4 events this summer, I was filming Fallen doing an interviews. It's just filming sort of like him actually interviewing with whichever the CEO, and it was always a question about Phelps, and it was almost word for word the same answer every time across the entire summer. And I think you've got 4 different, you've got your DreamHack, ECS, and then 2 ESL events, and it was just the same response each time. I think you're so right in the sense that they go in knowing that the interviews are going to be these questions, and there's no originality to any of them, and they just want to get out of there anyway. So they're only going to give the answers of the questions that they've prepped, I guess. Yeah, and I think that and as a whole, everyone loses because all of the content's the same.
The funny thing is, you actually brought up. Before, like when you were talking about like documentary type stuff and teams doing it or organizers doing it, I do feel like actually when you mentioned where you're working with, who was it you said, what was the organization that was doing the rugby thing?
So it was ESL.
It's MTG, right? Yes, MTG owns a company that was doing this other sport, and then you were contrasting it with that. And the point was that they'd had you make like sort of a 22-minute package of this, rather than, it wasn't like a full match, it wasn't the full tournament, it was like here's the short package where you get into the story, you find out what it's about, who wins, etc. The funny thing is, I do feel like that's an obvious area where, people have already done it briefly in esports in the past, where this sort of content should also develop, which is as TV channels get involved or as other media outlets get involved, because if they can find a sponsor or through their own revenue stream make it worth their while, to me, that would be the most obvious way to get all these casual people interested, is you have like an event movie, basically, let's say 20 minutes long, and it introduces you to, here are the big favorites coming in, here are the people who are the underdogs, and obviously, you pick those cynically because you know what the result was, this guy's going to come forth, so you introduce him at the beginning, and then you set up the tournament story, and you go ahead and you show it, because first of all, like, that would obviously do very well, I think, in terms of like getting casuals through the door, because they don't have to know much. But I'm amazed at some of the bigger kind of ambitious things that don't have that sort of content. Like, I'll give you a great example is ESL is doing this thing at the moment for IEM and ESL, which is that Intel Grand Slam, where the concept is, the first team to win 4 of these, I think it's like 15 tournaments or something. The first team to win 4 of them gets $1 million extra, and then they've built in this like fun element where if someone's got to 3 and then you beat them, you get an extra kind of bounty. So at the moment, right, it hasn't worked out because at the moment, unfortunately, like different teams have won every one, so there isn't currently anyone who's on like 3 titles, But that to me almost screams out for like you should have some sort of an episodic show that follows the tournaments, and keeps you updated on who's leading and then how the ones that were in the lead before did. That would almost seem to write itself to a degree, right? It's not even that tough to get the storyline out.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
I was going to say, do you not think that's just their attempt of trying to gain a stronghold on the players, because they failed previously in, I can't remember the whole WISA. What was the other one? What was the one? PA, that's the one. I think all of them are trying to now creatively figure out a way of making their league the most prestigious. And I mean, I think all of our the entire discussion so far about content, everything is all going to come to sort of a close, and it will work nicer when we do have a distinct hierarchy across the board between TOs.
Sure.
And
Duncan, I agree with what you said about, it's easy for people who don't know what's going on to come in and consume that and get all the story quickly and, see the best matches or whatever. I think that like distribution is important for that, because I think ESL right now is partnered with Hulu, and they're doing that, right? They're like, I guess, recapping.
Yes, they just started a bunch of shows,
IEM, right? Yeah, right.
That was the one, by the way, where, listen, I don't give a fuck. I didn't sign any NDA, so I can say this, right? That's the one where they asked me if they could use a little clip of one of my Thorin's Thoughts videos. And obviously, like, I don't have a problem with that, It's only like a 30-second clip, I assume. I'm not going to play the whole video. And right. I've already made all the ad revenue off the video anyway. It's not like it's like I'm not on fucking syndication, where I'm making all the money from it again. Mm. But one thing I did like was, just because this is where the world we're at with release forms, the wording in the release form did say that they get the rights to replay this video. It said across the universe in perpetuity. Like, right? Here's the thing I have with that, right? One, either some lawyer just really went to town on that, like, better fucking earn my money here, or that is some sort of clue that we are in some sort of like, a flat earth scenario where there's other worlds of humans, because otherwise why across the universe, it's just egregious, isn't it? Why across the universe? Like, I was about to sign that one until I saw that. I was like, fucking hell, across the universe. What's going on here?
Is that why you didn't sign it? Because it said...
I did in the end. I just thought, fuck it, why not? Like, I'm obviously not going to literally get mad that they showed it on like fucking Zenebel Ganubi or some shit I saw. I just signed it in the end, didn't I?
But that was the same as ESG had the same thing. ESG's form were for any content created to use forever, your image forever. And I'm not going to mention names, but there's people that had to then rebut the contract and, change some of their image rights in maybe a year max.
Okay, but anyway, I interrupted you, Matt. You were talking about like they're doing this Hulu series of some sort, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think they need the partnership for that to happen, right? Because like, how are they going to distribute that themselves? Like on their YouTube channel? Are they going to debut it on Twitch? They need to have.
Okay, let me ask you this then, Matt. I definitely agree with that point. By the way, like obviously, if you're a TV channel, you literally are the distribution network. You're not figuring out how we're going to bloody where we're going to put it. Oh, on TV. That's right. Yeah, right. But with that said, this ties into something that I think is a pretty good topic for teams and tournament organizers, because they don't make this type of content and in general have largely stuck to like, frag highlights, maybe the odd frag movie, like occasional interviews. Most tournament organizers and teams actually have pretty small YouTube channels relative to who they are and their budget. Like, put it this way, if I've got a YouTube channel comparable to the size of like an ESL type one, Like, I don't know off the top of my head. Do you know how many roughly ESL might have on the YouTube subscribers?
I think it's like 800 or 900,000.
See what I mean? 800,000, right? I have
Yeah.
250,000, and obviously I'm just a single person. I don't have any
Right.
budget to do this. I'm just doing it all with a webcam and mic, etc. It's kind of amazing that a massive tournament organizer with so many years, they might have been on YouTube for the whole time, 10 years, say, something like that, right?
Yeah.
You'd think if they'd have put more of this stuff out, especially in the early days when it was cheaper, I think they'd have built the subs a lot more. I think they should be like 3 million subs or something, you know. Isn't this kind of like, in a way, they've only got themselves into a catch-22, right? Where they say, oh, well, there's not really the interest in it, and, you know, where would we get the money back? But they also haven't built up the streams and the distribution network.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I think that's something that they've sort of always struggled with. And that's why they kind of, you know, bounce between like pro leagues on YouTube now, right? So they're always trying to figure out like where are they going to make the money on that. I think the YouTube thing was at the beginning. I mean, actually, my wife would know more about this because she worked on all the ESL YouTube stuff. But okay. I mean, it was just a place to put the VODs with the matches, right? And so that's why, I mean, a channel like yours has a lot more interaction, right? So that's why I think, you know, on YouTube, that's always going to do better than just posting the stuff, right? And especially if it's just posting matches, as opposed to maybe, you know, posting interviews or doing stuff like Joe Rogan or you know, podcast stuff like that, or like you do. So, I mean, I think that was never, I mean, for a company the scale of ESL, I don't think that they're going to be able to make that much money off of YouTube. I know roughly how much that they do make just posting matches. And it's like, I mean, it's not, you know, comparable to what they're making off sponsors and stuff like that. And of course, these days, you know, if you want to post any CS content, it's not going to be monetized or whatever. So that's sort of like out of the question now at this point.
Yes,
I think
that's true. No ad revenue off ECS, right? Because they're like, I've already given you that fucking ad revenue. That was that massive contract I signed with you.
Right, exactly, yeah. And that's what you talked about this, I think, in the content monetization. That's sort of how it's going now, is that people are paying to take your content and then they monetize it themselves. And
they've got the network, yeah.
Because they got the network, right? And you can't really compete against that. I mean, you know, MLG tried, I guess, and it's just tough. I mean, you got to get a lot of things in place in order for that to happen. Now, ESL has like the 24/7 channel now, which is pretty cool. But you know, they're still only getting like 1,500 or 2,000 viewers watching kind of these old matches. So the question is like, does it make sense to do a big documentary style thing and then just post it on YouTube? That's a question I've been asking myself. Because, you know, first of all, YouTube's like super hit or miss and algorithms and stuff, right? I mean, it's just crazy. So like, if you can make a deal with a Hulu or, you know, or work with MTG to get your stuff on their channels, because they own you, then that's always going to be probably the only reason that you're going to be looking to get involved with that kind of, you know, longer form pre-produced content stuff, I think.
Sure. I mean, that's why I kind of brought up the TV example, because to me, that's one where I think obviously ESL, etc., should be the ones doing this themselves. It wouldn't be me explaining it to them. But if you could sell them on the idea that this is going to be a way to make more money from the event you're already doing just by letting this team come, and they're going to basically buy the rights to do a documentary or whatever it might be, and then they're going to do a TV show, and you just have to give them space to work within, which admittedly, as Tom alluded to before, isn't always the easiest part, right? Like, even if you go to the event and get the media pass, etc., you can't always get the sort of footage you want, right? You might not be allowed on stage for the amazing winning moment that you'd have in every big documentary on TV.
No, a lot of the, especially ESL, they're quite sort of restricting in terms of their access. I mean, which is to their own right. But I mean, for the most part, it's kind of, we're both benefiting if I get the shot. I mean, I don't know who's winning or losing. I guess, I mean, that's up for discussion. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, a lot of tournament organisers are sort of quite restricting in terms of where you can go, when you can shoot, who you can film with, even if you are part of the team that might win the whole event. I mean, it has been the case of mine. I wasn't allowed on the stage at ES1 Cologne. And I was kind of like, dude, the confetti's coming down and they're lifting the trophy. I'm going on the stage. Yeah. And I don't think I think what needs to be established is that everyone wins kind of in these scenarios.
Yeah, but I don't think they want everyone to win. You know, I think they paid for the venue. They paid for the event. They want to, you know, they got their guys on stage. And I know, I mean, there's kind of like three layers to this. First of all, there's the external, you know, media who want to get stuff. And then there's the internal, like the ESL media. And then there's the ESL broadcast team, and they're never happy with the media being with anybody on stage in their shot, getting photographs, taking video, even if it's like, the guys that sit in the office next to us. It's like, can you guys try to not, because everybody's trying to get their own thing, right? And so you sort of have this kind of mini struggle of, who gets to be on stage and stuff. And ultimately, I think, if I'm a tournament organizer, I want to have the best footage. I want all the winning shots, the close-ups, the from behind, raising the trophy with the crowd. Like, that's going to be mine. I don't want anybody else to have that stuff. And maybe I'll share it, but just because, first of all, you can't have that many people on stage running around and all over your event and stuff, right? But also because it's sort of, you're right, I think, to take that footage as the organizer of the event.
I think you're right for sure, but then I guess it reflects back to our earlier argument, which was like, well, then you're not doing anything with it worthwhile. That's how I felt. Right? Yeah, but great, a 1 minute 30 hype video for every event with the same fucking track that everyone's heard a million times or whatever. And I guess that's, for me, the anger, where it's like, I want to do something with that you guys aren't doing. I guess that's what stemmed for the reason we had this discussion on Twitter, Duncan, was the fact that I was just like, they've got so much that they could do, and it's not. And I think there are a lot of people out there, including myself, where it's like, we appreciate that we're an early scene and resources may not be there that are with sort of the NFL or the UFC or whatever, but just let us in.
Sure.
And we'll create some greatness, and whether or not, whether you ESL break evens on the first rendition of it, or whether I don't know. I just think like...
Okay, how about this then? Give me an example of like something that you either hasn't been done or could be done better. Like, give me something on the top of your head, like you think to yourself, like, oh, I want to see something like this, or there's a gap for this in esports.
So there's I can't remember the name for the UFC version, but I think it's called Mic'd Up in NFL. Mic'd Up.
Yes, the one where you just put the mic on the person while they play, and then you edit like the best clips of it. It's obviously not the whole match.
Yeah, but
like a 10-minute video or something. Yeah.
But UFC did like coaches, and then they did like girlfriends, like guards.
Oh, okay.
And
they're on the crowd. Yes.
Yeah, and then they eliminated all of the commentary and the background noise, and you've got this real sort of personal sort of version of the match you just watched. Yes. And it generated, it's done fantastically for them. And then also just to like the embedded series that the UFC do when they send, and I can tell it's not even that resource intensive. It's a dude with a fucking camera, and he's just been sent out to one training camp. A dude with another camera has been sent out to another training camp, and they've sat with them for the week, and then they intercut them, and then they did that for every sort of the main fights of that month's event.
I have to say for that as well, that one's actually a pretty good example, because as you're saying, I don't think that one's actually probably that cost intensive or takes that much of a big team. And I have to say, when you're watching it, it is reality TV, because you do find yourself thinking, I am just watching this guy have a fucking phone call here. I barely even know what he's talking about, but somehow, because it's like extra info on the fight that's coming up, you're listening like really intently. Yeah. Like, what's he talking about? Who's he talking to on the phone? Like, it's easy as fuck, isn't it? It's all talk.
Yeah, and you kind of like build, even if photos you don't even know. So I find, for example, if I know who the main card are fighting, and then I know that sort of the fight beforehand, the second down the line fight, I'm like, oh, well, I know one of them, but I don't really know the other one. And all of a sudden you hear just, like you said, or a phone call from one of the other fighters that, he's had a great training camp, or, he's going to be bigger in the weigh-in, or the other guy looks small, the other guy looks dehydrated. There's this little thing like, oh, fuck, this is going to be an even match. And this isn't just by chance. This is the editor knowing that these elements need to come into that video for this to be the most even match possible, and for them to get insight. And this is just, it's completely missed.
It's also the fact that that's the big show. That's the main card on the ticket, is that these two guys are going to fight. I mean, try to go to an event and like get a story, because try to go to an event with a story in mind and shoot that, even as anybody. It's just, the team might be gone before you get there. They got booed out of the group stage, and you're lucky if they're still at the hotel. It's like, it's sort of difficult to try to create this stuff beforehand when you assume it's going to be a certain outcome, but it's a tournament, right? And in tournaments, you don't really know what's going to happen. So I think that it's sort of like poker, the World Series of Poker. Kind of the best you can do is do kind of profiles on the players themselves, on the teams, and talk about where they've been. But like, I think to try to create like a tension between them, like a particular matchup, which is a fantastic idea, just to create that kind of buzz and that hype, requires some sort of like a different format. Just because the tournament like doesn't have that hype.
Yeah, obviously it wouldn't work as well for one tournament. That has to be more like, we're going to follow them for 3 tournaments or whatever, and these are the 2 top teams, and let's see how they battle or whatever. Okay, but actually along these lines, the one of the features that he just referenced here, the Mike Top-type one. Funny thing is, that is like so obviously like there for the taking in CSGO, for example, because I actually know like when they did all the when they did those majors, it was back in 2015 where the ESL famously actually had the VODs with the team comms over the top of them. Right. Now, obviously that meant some of them were in like, Russian and Swedish, but people went away and some people got like some of the VODs and made subs for them, and they were very popular actually. I love that. While I can totally get while the players were like, I don't want the whole fucking game out there with every caller making it right. The funny thing is, all that happened was because the players complained, it was just canned completely. Now, the bizarre part about that is I know that both Riot Games and OGN, the Korean broadcaster for League of Legends, do exactly this, but they just did it where they record you, but that doesn't come out. They just wait till later on, usually like a few days later actually, and they release kind of like this, like a one way it's just fragments, so it's like a funny call, or it's like one call in the game that you made that like in a team fight or something, and you don't really give away like all the details, so the team doesn't mind. Obviously you have to have the team on board with it in the first place, and in these leagues they just have to be, it's not as much of a negotiation, so I get that's a bit different, but I do feel like in CS that would be very popular.
I think so. I mean, I think that's why live streaming is so popular, because people, you're getting to see like a different perspective, right? And I know for me, like, I love all the commentators. I love the commentating in games. But sometimes watching a game just with them doing their call outs and their talking strategy and stuff like that, like it adds like a totally new level to it. I think you're right. I mean, ESL just killed it after they did the after they did the one event, and the players were so mad about it, and they just were like, well, we're just not going to touch that again. I think doing like a small listen in segment might be okay. But yeah, I don't really know why they don't do that. I think it's great. I mean, I think it's great anytime. That's what I've always wanted to do with my videos and stuff, was kind of take it from this top level, this is what's going on in the tournament, and you can watch the gameplay and stuff like that, and kind of bring it down to the level of you're on the floor with these guys, or what's going on in their head. Same stuff like Tom does, right? Like to try to add to sort of add this human element to it, right? Because otherwise it's like, especially when you're watching video games, you don't get to see the player maybe in the little cam in the bottom right, but sort of try to like elicit these, or not elicit, but like to try to capture these like small interactions that they have with each other and the emotions that they have. Like, that to me is really an interesting thing that hasn't properly been done yet, right? And that's something that I think that the tournament organizers probably should do, because those type of moments happen at events more than in a team house.
Yeah, I mean, like when I was making these documentaries, I was thinking, right, I cannot beat ESL at showing the production. Like, I'm not going to be able to do that, but I can do the other stuff pretty well. So that was my sort of like ethos going in, and but there were still things I was just like, why haven't they done that? Like, for example, when there's a timeout, why are we not going to the coach's mic? Why are we not like hearing what he's
There's
saying?
A lot of reasons why things do and don't happen at ESL, and not all. And
was it swearing?
No, it's not. No, I mean, it's not even like a reasoning. It's just like sometimes things just do and don't happen because it's just events are just chaotic and it's hard to get things. I mean, I was pushing for doing interviews with like at halftime, taking a halftime break and stuff like that, and talking to the coach, whatever. And what's your mindset going into the second half? Because you can sort of, at the very least, talk about. Set an expectation, because I think setting an expectation.
Well, I mean, to give you the example, okay, they actually in the last, I think it was maybe like 5 years ago, they started forcing NBA coaches to do this. And what you'd usually have to do is, I think it was after the first TV timeout, you had to do a little interview with one of the TV reporters, right? And they would say something, it only has to be like a minute or 30 seconds, And even though they made they had to basically force them initially, and famously a bunch of the ones who were like the legendary coaches, like Phil Jackson or Greg Popovich, they would kind of like fuck around in that that time and purposely sort of like waste the person's time and be like, oh, well, we're down, so we've got to score more, you know, like, even though some of them were dicks, a lot of them actually eventually realized, yeah, obviously I'm not going to give away the whole game plan, etc. right here, but they all eventually did learn sort of a language of how to say stuff like, well, you know, like we need to get on the boards more, they're out rebounding, you know, stuff that you can say that isn't in any way giving away strategy, but provides a little bit of value to the person listening who you can't take it for granted. They know that aspect, you know, they're not following the stats in the same way you are as a coach.
That benefits the desk as well, though. When they
for sure, it'd be great if you could pick up a little detail, right?
Benefits everybody.
I absolutely think that would be great, yeah, because that's it. That's actually something where, funnily enough, that's one of those things I think is really underrated in esports, actually, is whenever we're talking on the desk, there are so many times that we take a detail that we heard from an interview, and that can be like a key focal point for the analysis. Like, for example, if you hear that, like, oh, this player who's standing in, oh, he's not just going to play the spots of the player he's replacing, he's going to swap with a different player and do this over here. Just knowing that changes how you'll then analyze the game and how you then interpret his performance, you know. Stuff like that you can't take for granted. I mean, actually, it's one of the areas where I think esports is way behind. I've always said this. How is it that to this day, unless you can actually contact the players, sometimes you don't know who the in-game leader of a team is. You're like, is it this guy? I think he said it was 3 months ago. Like, how is that? Is this sports? What is it? It's mad, isn't it?
That's esports, man.
Yeah. How does it usually work though with sports? I mean, like, do they bring in a sheet? I'm just a genuine question.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, they actually do in most sports, as far as I know they do this in the NBA, right? Even if in theory in game you don't play strictly like the traditional 5 positions in basketball, for example, like you have a player who plays a little bit different, you still have to list someone as each of those positions. Like you have to list someone as a small forward or something, even if it's like LeBron James and he actually just is basically a point guard who just has the ball all the time, you know. You still do list them all out, and for exactly this reason, so that in theory, at the very minimum, people know the basic parameters, and then you can go with the advanced stuff, you know. But it's kind of mad because the best example is actually Virtus Pro. If you want to talk about how hard it is to tell stories, when they were having this massive slump, right, some people eventually identified, like, oh, I wonder if it's because Snacks is the in-game leader. And then what happened is, after one of the events they did really badly, it might have been Mykonos actually, like Pasha did a tweet where he was like, you know, or a Facebook post where he's like, oh, we'll change the in-game leader now. And apparently he was trolling when he did that. Right, that didn't help us because we all just were like, well, it's okay, next tournament, they changed an in-game leader. You know, that's going to re-kick everything. Apparently they still hadn't. And it was like 3 tournaments later they changed the in-game leader. Like, come on, guys. You're actively working against us now.
Yeah, you don't get any, like, data sheet before, you know, you arrive to the venue, right? Like, you're sort of, you got to take your own notes, right? And you show up, so... I mean, that's just sort of how esports has always kind of been, right? It's just sort of a chaotic mess. And I think that, like, things like a player organization, things like just structure where there is none. I mean, I kind of understand why Blizzard and why League of Legends want to do things the way they want to do. It's because they want to make sure that they can really make it the best that they can. Because when you have chaos, when you have this team doing this and that team doing that, and, you know, everybody's like running around with their head cut off, and you're sitting at the desk trying to figure out, how do I tell this story? It's difficult, you know, and it's difficult for the analysts, it's difficult for the organizers, it's difficult for the viewers, because, you know, they're just not getting that information that will really, you know, maybe not help them understand what's going on, but really, you know, help them feel completely confident that they you know what is going to happen, you know, maybe.
Okay, Matt, do you have an example of some kind of content that, like, either you think's like right there, no one's doing it, or you haven't been able to get done at ESL or wherever it is that you've worked, etc.? Like, is the type of content or something in line with something, a reference point you could give us of something you want to see that hasn't been done?
Oh, I knew you were gonna do this. I mean, I think, I don't know, like, I really like stuff like that Breaking Point documentary where you're following the team.
Yes.
I think like the documentary style is very much like kind of in, especially for esports. And I think that the reason is because you get this idea of what's going on, like I said, like at the ground floor. And
sure.
I think for a lot of people that are maybe new to esports or not new, but they, you know, they're not like in the industry like us, they miss out on a lot of the culture and a lot of the feeling and the reason, like the things that we know that make us excited about it. Things like what's going on after the event in the lobby. What are the, you know, what are you know, the people playing like money matches in the salty suite at Evo and stuff like that. Really getting this kind of like this basic, not basic, but the grassroots kind of style of esports, which to me, you know, I'm a little bit, and sometimes publicly, a bit salty on Twitter about how mainstream everything is going, and how, you know, all the big Comcasts and stuff are buying teams and stuff for Overwatch League. And I think that, you know, that's great because, you know, for one, it gives me a job, but I think that people might really want to see what made me interested in esports in the first place, which is like kind of just, you know, people bringing their shit to a LAN and like, and you know, just grinding out hours and hours of games for fun and like getting drunk and then you know, talking shit and stuff like that. I think that, like, if I was gonna like focus on one thing, I'd really want to cover kind of that FGC feel that you know, we put it together ourselves, and it's gonna be sick. And
the funny thing is, when you reference that, like the Breaking Point one, because obviously that was like a very controversial one that they managed to do a documentary that was basically like the worst moments of a lot of their players, you know, which a lot of players wouldn't want to take part in for obvious reasons. But actually, that's another area where I feel like in the future, at least, players are going to get sold on this concept. Because I remember actually after one of the majors, I'm not sure if it was MLG Columbus or DreamHack Cluj-Napoca, but there was one of the majors. It must have been LG Columbus, actually, I think, because they weren't Astralis before then. I remember Astralis had a video that they did after the tournament where when they were driving home, because as usual, they got like rocked out in the semifinals in like the most depressing fashion ever, you know. They had a video where they were all driving back in the truck to wherever it was the hotel was. And famously, they zoom in when Device is literally like a movie, like on cue, you know, one tear just drops down his eye and rolls down his cheek. And, you know, the reason it has to be one tear is because you have to be able to follow the tear as it rolls, you know. If there's too many tears, it's an avalanche, you know. You want to see that one and you go, holy fuck, it's going all the way down, you know. And like, it's obviously, here's the key thing, right? Before that, I'm sure there's a lot of people who thought their opinion on Device is based on how he is as a player, you know. Did they like him as a player, whatever. I'm sure people who even knew him in person didn't know a whole lot about what he was like as a competitor, you know. But I bet that video, while it shows a bad moment for your team, probably did win over a load of fans. I bet a load of people were like, you know what, I actually never really liked Device before, but fuck, that really hurt him, you know, that he lost that match. As bizarre as it sounds, you should be able to sell these people on the fact that even the loss can work to your benefit in that sense, right? Then there's going to be a guy who's like, fuck, I want him to win next time. I'm pulling for him now.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. And I think you got to realize, like, if you like assess like a good film, any great movie that anyone's watched, the troughs of your hero character are what makes the peak so high. Sure. You know, and I think that translates as well in a larger scale across events throughout a year. And, you know, you've got all these losses of I'm just hypothetically now, you know, if your ninjas in pajamas and then they've got the major, and that makes them getting through that tournament and winning the major so high. Sure, yeah. And I think yeah, you're 100% right. And I think people don't realize that these sort of pieces of content that aren't always portraying your team. And that's something I struggled with the SK guys, is they always wanted to be in a good light.
Yes.
And I was like, yeah, but you lost the map, or, you know, the guys are saying tons of swear words in Brazilian in the smoking area. That's part of the showing the struggle, you know. Yeah, and it was an argument I had to have, and luckily enough they were, you know, sort of accepting of me keeping it in, and it ends up in the main documentary. And yeah, and you need to show as much as sort of important are the wins and you know, the end sort of climax of them winning, equally as important are the sort of, you know, act 2 fails.
It's funny that you mentioned that out smoking, because I think some of the best footage I've gotten is when the guys go out and they take their smoke break after the game or whatever, because that's when you really see the legitimate like feelings that they have on their faces. But I don't know, like, should I be, you know, publishing, you know, these guys out there smoking? Like, you know, a lot of kids look up to these guys, right? So I don't know, but I think that if I were going to do a piece like just independently, yeah, I would definitely show like all this shit.
Here's the funny thing, right? Actually, back in the day, this is an old school story, probably like 10 years ago now, there was once a video that I think Fragbite shot, because, you know, they were Swedish websites that were around all the Swedish teams, and they once had a little video where it was actually Spawn, the old SK player, and he was like talking like this kind of a setting, you know, talking to his team outside after a match, and it was where they'd just played Fnatic, and this is like very early on in that Fnatic team with Forrest and Khan and all those guys getting very very good. And because at the time, Forrest was still like a rising talent, whereas, you know, Spawn was like the established one of the best players. There's this wicked interview where, well, not an interview, actually, just a segment from them smoking where he just says something like, that fucking Forrest, I want to smash his finger in. And like, the mad thing about that is, right, obviously in that setting, you probably didn't want that out there. But if you could have built that into the kind of programming we're talking about, that would be fucking amazing for that rivalry. Like the next time they play each other, knowing that like it really triggered him and he was mad about it, etc. And if he obviously then, like in a dream world of the movie, he'd obviously beat him in the next match, wouldn't he? So it would have built into it, and you'd see the frustration transformed into something else. Because when you were saying there about SK, Tom, what that really reminded me of is, like, this is an example of how missed the opportunities are in esports. Gambit just won this major in CSGO, right? And even if you tell people, like, they were an underdog, you know, what an amazing result, it can't capture it, because a lot of people aren't going to have known what they did before, and they're going to think, right, well, they won, so they must have been the best at the end. If you could have shown the hard times that team went through, because apparently they had like one of these like nightmare boot camps where everyone was like, fuck you, we're all quitting after this tournament, you know, like one of these classic stories right before the major. And then in the tournaments before the major, they lost like every online game and, you know, all the lands they were going to. Like, for example, people don't know this, the team they played in the quarterfinals at the major, Fnatic, actually like put them out of DreamHack Summer in the group stage. You know, there was all these aspects where if you could have, even if after the fact you could have had some footage to work with, you know, once they'd won the major, that would be the best way to then build up to them winning the major, you know, setting the scene that they weren't the best team and even they didn't think they were going to win. And then if you can tell the story, it's about 10 times more powerful.
That's why I think the teams should have their own video crews and build their own stories, because I mean, when you have 12 teams coming to an event, you can't cover all of them, but those teams themselves, you know, they can cover, like Astralis does, right? They cover like A to B, and they can kind of tell that story.
Here's a topic then we could maybe make as like the closing topic then, because another aspect that I can see that is a problem, and I know you must run into this, both of you with where you work, is that if it is the NFL and if it is NFL films, well, one of the great things is, even if we film an interview now with the guy and his coach, we can also just go, oh, look, we've got this fucking 60-year video library of all the games he played, all the interviews he did, and we have, you know, there's no rights to it secure. We have them all. And then the guy just goes to town. And obviously nowadays, if you had that footage, you could create an amazing documentary without any new footage even being filmed. It's just a guy in an editing suite with access to all the shit. But obviously one of the problems of how fractured esports is, you know what, sometimes in a documentary, I'd love to show a clip of this part of the match, but is that going to get the whole video axed off YouTube because the tournament organizer doesn't give me the rights for it? That's an ongoing problem at the moment, right? Yeah,
I mean, it's not even the TO. I mean, like, for what Matt said, I think you're right, but at the same time, is say I want to know the rivalries between the scenes, so I've got to what? I've got to be subscribed to the Fnatic, the SK, the Astralis, the Gambit, the Cloud9, Liquid. I've got to subscribe to all of these channels. I've got to keep up to date with what each of them are making, and it's kind of inefficient in a way. So there's like, what, 20 teams that I've got to constantly watching all of their content and all of their channels to just trying to get a sense of who's, you know, having sort of arguments with who and who wants to beat the next team at whatever match. And that's why having it housed by the TOs makes it digestible, I guess, as an audience.
Well, I mean, I think that the team should cover themselves, and they don't have to cover all the other teams, right? The TOs have to try to cover everybody, and I think they can only do it kind of surface level.
I mean, the teams can appeal to their fans, right, and build their brand with their people, and then hopefully the tournament organizer does it on a higher scale, you'd hope.
Yeah. To your point about the fractured, you know, esports and who do you know, how do you get footage, who do you credit, and stuff like that. That is something I deal with. I just think about it all the time, and I've not found a good answer, because
I think it's actually one of the biggest things holding things back. Because I have to say, personally, like, I'm not someone who has like mad editing skills, but I definitely would have done more pieces that weren't just me talking to a camera if it wasn't for rights issues, you know, because it's scary stuff. It can get your channel fucked up. Obviously, like, it can just end up being a waste of time what you did, you know. But there's so much, the amount that everyone could do would be insane in that sense.
But it's quite blurred, though. It's very, very blurred in esports. You've got guys with huge YouTube channels that are just...
It's mad, isn't it? How many of them use copyright shit?
There's no original content in anything that they make. Like some of that, I don't know, the guy with the meme froggy face that makes these videos that go on, you know, reach the top of Reddit every single time he posts a video. And that's, you know, credit to him and the style that he's done. But at the same time, it's, you have made nothing original.
Yeah. Score Esports, I saw a video today, and it was just like history of trash talking, and pretty much every clip was just taken, and then they didn't even like credit in the video baked in. It was like in the description, here's this YouTube video, credit to them. It's like, well, I mean, did you ask them for permission to use it? Did you just take it? And sometimes it's not even possible to ask permission. Sometimes I don't know, should I credit ESL or should I credit Valve? Like, who owns the rights to the footage of the game? And I guess it's ESL, but sometimes it's not. Like, I don't know. I don't really know. And there's no clear answer to that. I know when you watch the NFL, it says, distribution and accounts of the game are, prohibited without express written consent of the NFL. ESL doesn't say any of that stuff. Nope. I would assume that they're, upset if people use their content, but at the same time, like, does it hurt them? Are they going to go after them? You're not showing a full match.
Sure. The funny thing is, actually, that's a topic, and interesting enough, I guess I can make one like a closing point, that even these massive organizations still have a blind spot there, because I don't know if you ever watched these, Tom, but there are people on YouTube who basically make highlight films that are like the equivalent of the old frag movies, where you just take the demos yourself and you make them. And famously for the UFC ones, right? Yeah, the UFC does a killer job on like the behind the scenes stuff and these countdowns, but none of them can touch the guys who do like the highlight movies, where it'll just be like the best Anderson Silva. And the sad thing is, those guys get their channels fucked up all day when, the video gets big enough that it gets noticed or gets content ID matched, And that's an example where in a mainstream sport, I would say to the UFC, dude, why are you just hiring this guy? I mean, he's literally got no skills. Well, no like traditional skills, he hasn't got a degree, hasn't got a massive camera. He's just taken your footage and he's done an amazing job where everyone's mad hyped on Reddit when they've seen and they're like, fucking hell, I can't wait for the next fight. Like, that guy should be working for you. It's kind of mad actually that you're just fucking him up and then you don't provide, kind of to touch what you said before. What makes you mad is that it's not like they took his video down because theirs is better. They don't even have one, or theirs is just like 30 seconds long,
Yeah, I mean, the 100% thing I've always seen is you got to realize a lot of these kids, like, there's a 14-year-old kids with a fucking cracked Sony Vegas license that are just getting all this footage and making killer little films.
Yeah, some of them are sick, aren't they?
They don't even want any money. They'd love to have their content just pushed out on the ESL channel. And I feel like if ESL had like this community section of their YouTube, whatever, where they just absorbed in all of, the user-generated content that's done, all the edits, the grades. And one thing I really, really miss from back in the day, especially 1.6, Source, and all the other, or even when I used to play in Call of Duty, there used to be websites that were they had frag movie competitions, like the Movie Vault, and like Shaolin Productions with these Quake films, and these were like
Halo did the same thing.
And these were sick films. These were films,
amazing.
And it was like, it is so, and this is because of the sort of the how precious like demos were back in the day.
Yes.
You got a demo, and this was, that's the only way you could have had the data for this clip. There wasn't Twitch, and I get now that we've got into a much more accessible library of, we can just clip a quick Twitch stream in seconds, whatever. We've lost this craft of these movie makers that made these fantastic bits of. I mean, for example, I remember sitting in ESL 1 Cologne, and I was at the practice rooms, and there was just everybody gathered around Elige's computer, like from all of the teams, and they're watching Annihilation 2, the CS 1.6 movie. And it was just like, even to this day, people are still going back to these great 1.6 movies that I've lost. And I think I had this idea where I was going to create a website and I was going to bring back remember the best damn movie competitions?
Sure, yeah.
So the best movie competition, they had it was like a $200 prize pool, whatever. But just a little bit of money incentive, this just generated all of these fantastic films like once a year. I was like, fuck it, you could definitely do that now. And I don't know why people aren't. Maybe I should do it. I don't know, but I miss that. And I think, yeah, you're right. I think there's so much just talent just lost into the ether, and it shouldn't be pushed away. It should be brought in.
I will say, to ESL's credit, though, is that pretty much all the guys who were on their video team at any given time were frag movie makers before.
Here's the downside, Matt. They did hire some wicked guys. Unfortunately, they never made any fucking frag movies. Almost felt
exactly.
Like, I'd have hired them half for that as well.
Some of the best guys have moved on to just crazy shit. It's like, it's amazing they can do that, and they started frag movies. I mean, that's what, kind of the awesome thing about esports is that if you're into something, like, it's, at least, I don't know about these days, but like, not too many years ago, you could be an amateur and just get a job and then, just learn it through esports. Like, like you always talk about, we need more writers. It's like the same is true with video. Like just pick up a camera, go to an event and just make something sick or whatever, right? Or rip stuff and just edit it differently, whatever you want to do. Like you can do that. And because esports is such a community driven industry, I mean, at least the people who do it right, they understand that like you have to have that kind of that culture, and you have to understand, that the audience, it's a picky audience. Like, let's be honest, right?
Sure.
Like people don't like outsiders coming in and pretending, right? So if, there's a big opportunity for people who are, interested in getting involved. And, I'm not going to advocate, torrenting Sony Vegas by any means, but, a lot of us got started.
If it happened to fall in your lap,
if it happened to
and
fall,
your hand clicked on it, then now you make a movie or something.
Yeah, if the crack happened to run itself and whatever, that's how a lot of people learned. That's how I learned, I know for sure. And I'll tell you what, like going to school, I guess in the esports world, like they're looking for people who know esports, and they're looking for people who have been involved with it. And that's how you're going to get into that.
Sure. Do you have any sort of closing remark, Tom, at the end?
I think, it just sounds like we've been bashing it a lot recently, but throughout this talk, but actually, like we're doing okay. And there's a lot of great, I think the main thing at the moment is structure. And I think once the funds keep coming in, we're going to create better stuff. And I think we've got actually the fact that we know that these platforms like NFL and UFC are out there, and the way that we can structure storylines is just fantastic for the scene. And I think once the TOs are open to creating these formats, I think the game's just going to get more fun to watch. I think that's what everyone wants, really.
Yeah, I kind of agree with the message that, like, yeah, it does sound like we've criticised a lot of the areas where it doesn't exist now, but I would say probably the big positive to end on is that unlike a lot of other areas in esports, like there's a lot of areas where like beginners, who haven't had their break or whatever will complain, I can't get in. The big problem in this particular area is there's a lot of really good people who are already established who can't get the funding for the projects and can't get the media time and can't get the rights, and all these aspects that at the moment have to be fixed. But I kind of agree, the fact that these examples we've given before exist and are so obvious that you should at least embrace some of these aspects, it seems almost certain that as long as it keeps getting bigger and there's more money comes through the door, gradually they're going to become, like, it's going to transition to a world where we do have these sorts of film departments and archives, and you will get these storyline build-up things, especially I think at some point when they realize that how to make it sell more tickets or increase the hype for a major, help them sell a major, for example. That might be a good one as well if you did a great after movie,
Hey, this is Huck. If you want to watch this top 3 asshole keep doing esports content, subscribe to Thorin's YouTube channel.